Thank you for joining me on People's Space. The name is Wenson Mavor, and of course, today we will be discussing what many term the elephant in the room when it comes to Zambia's fiscal governance, and that is the issue of debt. As a country, where are we with regards debt? What impact has debt have on the general populace? And most importantly, we've heard President Hakainde Hichilema on record, updating the nation on the progress that has been made with that regard. And we would like to know what implications this progress is going to have on the general economic outlook of the country. And to be able to give us those answers is a gentleman who's a friend and somebody that I've again had the privilege to professionally work with. And of course, sought some advice from when need arises. And this is no other than Peter Mumba, all the way from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. Peter, you're welcome on the People's Space. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Wenson, for having me. I think I'm very happy to be part of this amazing podcast.
Yeah, so we have a tradition here, Peter. Before people get to hear so much of what you have to share with regards the conversation on debt, people always want to know, who is Peter? Apart from those nice presentations and those sometimes very complicated language you use when it comes to debt issues, debt this, debt that, creditor what, and all these things. Who is Peter beyond those things?
Well, thank you so much again. So like I said, I think it's an honor to be part of this amazing podcast. I think I have been watching this series, I must say, and I think it's something that, is timely, especially for, a country like Zambia. So in terms of who I am, I think Peter is a simple guy. Born Peter Nsokolo Mumba on the Copper Belt, specifically in Chingola. I think I was born to a mother who is of Mumba origin from Mbala. From Mbala. Her name is Messi Ntenga. And also to her father, Angel Mumba the late, who hailed from Ndola, but tribe-wise is a Bemba from Luapula. So I come from Luapula, partially also from Mbala because of my mother. In terms of my siblings, I think we were three, or let me say we have been three. Of course, I am the firstborn, but I have a gentleman that has been my older brother. But biologically, I'm the firstborn. So being the secondborn now, because there's this big brother that I have, we are three boys. I also have a younger brother. And of course, a late young sister. She was the last born. So we have grown up as three boys. And we have taken life so casually and also gone in our different walks. I think my older brother is an engineer. Though my young brother did economics, he's now a military guy. And there's me who has taken the economics route and the development route as well. So I think I schooled in Chingola in my entire primary. I was at Sacred Heart Convent School, I think up to grade 9. Then I moved to David Kaunda Secondary School here in Lusaka.
DK.
Yes, DK, where I did my grade 10 up to grade 12. I think thereafter, I always wanted to be an engineer. So I shaped my subject combination to suit my engineering path. But I think along the way, things didn't quite work out. So I decided to pursue economics. And I then went to the University of Namibia. So in the University of Namibia, I did my bachelor's there, my honors degree. And after completing, I was fortunate to have been part of the top 3% of the class. And I earned myself a scholarship to do a master's degree. So this was a collaborative master's, by the Africa Economic Research Consortium. So they did it in partnership with the University of Namibia, alongside other universities in Africa. We had the University of Zimbabwe, the University of Malawi, we had the University of Botswana, then we also had Cape Coast University in Ghana, then we also had the University of Mauritius. Yeah, so it was basically 5 universities coming together. Yeah, and I think we did quite spend some good time. We also spent some time in Nairobi on an intensive training program as part of the same master's program. Thereafter, I think I took on a career at the British Council. That's where I started professionally. I think I worked for the British Council for a very long time because I started on a part-time basis whilst I was still in school. I think I started working for the British Council when I was in my first year as a part-time invigilator. Yeah, then I rose through the ranks until I became a project coordinator, also an exam coordinator, in short, coordinating exams in Namibia. So I spent almost, I think, 10 years in Namibia. Then I came back to Zambia. And when I came back, I think that's the time I had the opportunity to join the Center for Trade Policy and Development, specifically under the Zambia Tax Platform, where I did a lot of research on social and economic issues. I was the social and economic monitoring specialist there. Yeah, then from there, I moved on to the public finance desk and started coordinating the Zambia Debt Alliance. So I think up to now, that's where I am. So that is Peter. Then on the social side, I'm married. Yeah, I'm a husband.
Okay. Tough luck.
Yeah.
Tough luck, guys. Tough luck. This one is off the market.
Yeah. I am a husband and married to, obviously.
How many wives?
I married one wife.
Okay.
A very good friend of mine. Yeah. I think we have been married for about 4 months now.
Congratulations.
But we have been together for 8 years.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So she's my best friend, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we have now started life together. On the other side of the social part of my life, I think I love sport. Yeah, I love sport. I know the body sometimes is a bit deceiving, but I do love sport.
I get that a lot, so I understand you.
Yeah, I play a lot of squash. Yeah, in my part time, I play squash. Currently playing at Lusaka Club. Then I also do karate. I think I've done karate for
interesting. Okay,
more than 15 years now.
Oh,
yeah. So
Which belt are you?
I'm a black belt actually.
Okay,
Shodan black belt. Karate Zen Gojuru, but I've also done Shotokan and other karate.
Okay, I'll pretend I know what all those are. But the most important thing is there's a black belt here, guys. There's a black belt here.
Yeah. Then besides sport, I think I also watch football, though I'm not very good, so I don't play. I usually watch. When I get the opportunity to play, I do play for fun, but not competitively. Yeah. Then I also love arts. In terms of arts, I mean performing arts. I love drama. I think I have had a background in acting, a background in directing as well. Yeah, and in script writing. I think I've written a few scripts here and there. Won several awards as well in Zambia. I think before I left to Namibia, I think I've won several awards such as Best Actor, Lusaka Province, almost becoming Ngoma Awards nominee for Best Actor. That was in 2010. I've also done directing. I think I was the 3rd best director on the Copperbelt Province in 2011. I think I directed Chingola Secondary School. Yeah, if I'm not, I was the youngest director and I came out 3rd in that particular competition. Beyond that, I think I've also done a few commercials, of course, not in Zambia, but in Namibia, a few commercials on TV with big companies. And I've also done a lot of other acting, on-screen acting now, with quite a lot of directors, especially in Namibia. I think I'm yet to tap into the Zambian media space. So is it the arts industry?
The arts industry.
Yeah, so I think briefly that's about Peter.
What an interesting combination. Sometimes when you see people do all those nice presentations that you do, when you're talking about economics and breaking it down for the majority of us, a lot of people don't know what a reservoir of talent you are. But anyway, it's always interesting just to get to find out the other side of a person. So I think as a person who wants to start acting, I have where to start from in terms of notes and lessons, since you have that experience. Yeah. So coming to our conversation, the issue of debt. One of the things that I would like us to start with is the current state of the, Zambia's debt restructuring under the G20 framework. A lot has been spoken about that particular aspect. But where are we and what are the anticipated outcomes when it comes to that? And maybe for the lay people, it would help also to just break it down a little bit.
Okay. I think in terms of debt restructuring, I think debt in itself, I think, is a conversation that is not new to the Zambian people. Including the people in the region, in the region, Africa as a whole. I think several other countries have been struggling with debt besides Zambia. We've known of Ghana, we've known of Kenya. Actually, there are so many. Just that a few of them have come out have been in the limelight because of their interaction with the IMF and with other bond holders. But I think for Zambia's case, I think one important thing to note is that debt in itself, I think, has been a very big challenge for Zambia. I think coming from the time we had the HIPIC, the Heavily Indebted Poor Country Initiative, where Zambia successfully completed that program. So this was a particular program, I think, in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, that was meant to help heavily indebted countries. Zambia was not alone. There were so many others in the region and outside the region as well that were struggling with debt. And I think Zambia then committed to a number of reforms around that time. And I think by mid-2000s, say 2004, 5, 6, I think 2005, we reached completion point where we had finished that program. We had reformed.
The famous HIPIC.
The famous HIPIC, yes. A significant
could
chunk
hear a lot of people, HIPIC,
yes,
HIPIC.
HIPIC. And I think most of us didn't even understand what
HIPIC was.
Yes. So I think by 2005, we had reached completion point, and we had reformed most of our policies. Our economy was now on track, with the reforms that we had put in place. And then also a significant chunk of our debt was actually cancelled. I think our debt around that time, public debt on the external front, was around 7 billion, just in excess of 7 billion US dollars. And around 6 billion dollars was actually cancelled, meaning that we were left with only about 500 to 600 million of debt. So we are talking about almost 90% or 80% of our debt being cancelled. Remember, not restructured, but entirely cancelled. Yeah. And so we were then now starting on a new and fresh page. And looking at the several reforms we had done, the commitments, we started growing our economy, and the kwacha was now stronger. Copper prices were doing fine. So mining was also doing very fine. And around that time also, I think there was a commitment from government. I think around 2006, 7, 8, we realized, I think we had the MMD, the late Levi Patrick Mwanawasa, may so rest in peace. The president was Levi Patrick Mwanawasa at that time. And so his commitment to fighting things such as corruption, employing prudent public finance, management policies, and all those things, I think they did shape the Zambian economy at that time, and it was booming. One thing that I remember around that time is the famous referral point of the kwacha dollar rate, where it was around 5 kwacha.
Yeah. Yes. At some point, even 3. I remember I went to change, some money, and it was about 3 something, if I remember correctly. It was 3 kwacha something.
Yes. So you see, it even went as low as 3 kwacha. So actually, it's because of the reform program that we had, the HIPIC success, the successful HIPIC program, and also the policies that we had put in place that had put some confidence in our investors, and copper prices were also quite high. But I think over time, we didn't quite manage our public finances very well, and we found ourselves in a huge debt again, which needed to be dealt with. But unfortunately, I think this time around, from around 2019, government has been trying to rework this debt, hoping that we would get back to the HIPIC, the post-HIPIC arrangement scenario, the good old days, they would call them. But unfortunately, I think the dynamics are a bit different in that the creditors that we have now are slightly different. There's emergence of new creditors in the, in the space now. We have the Eurobond holders. These are highly private commercial lenders, and they need to make profits from their money, because
so they can't also forgive.
Unfortunately, they find it very difficult to forgive, because they also have an obligation towards their investors, people that have put money in their funds, so that they can grow that money. And Zambia being a defaulter to the Eurobonds, I think it was going to be very irrational for us to begin to ask for a total cancellation, because we understand that this is money that is supposed to be repaid, with a profit at the end. So there's also countries such as China that have come on the block this time around with an expanded financing arrangement that has led to several, countries being indebted to China. So that also changes the dynamic a little bit. So it becomes difficult now to advocate for debt cancellation in this particular setting because of the various players that are in the room. So that's why the conversation has tilted slightly from from cancellation to restructuring. But this is not to say that restructuring is impossible, but looking at how difficult it would have been.
So in simple terms, Peter, when we talk about the issue of debt restructuring, you've elaborately stated cancellation is out of the question. But when we talk about restructuring, are we referring to perhaps the deferring?
Yes.
In terms of the period we're supposed to pay.
Exactly.
In simple terms, when we say debt restructuring, that's what they're talking about.
Exactly. So we are basically saying debt restructuring, defer the payments to a future date to allow us more time to put ourselves together and look for the money in short. And then another restructuring option that is there is reduce the interest rates. So reduce interest rates and defer the payment. So that is the restructuring that we have been talking about. And in doing this, some of the creditors have actually cancelled part of their debt. An example I would give is the same Eurobond creditors we're talking about, these Eurobond holders. So what they did is the interest component was actually cancelled, leaving us with a principal payment. So remember, our total Eurobond debt was around 3 billion. So we had accumulated interests amounting to about $890 million. So leaving our Eurobond debt in total at 3.8, close to 3.9 billion. But they cancelled the 800 and something billion on top and left us with only 3 billion to pay, which was the initial amount that we had obviously borrowed. But this will obviously be paid back in a deferred time period. Obviously, with time, it's also going to accrue some interest that will be good for them as well. But other creditors have not given us that cancellation in terms of debt.
Obviously, credit goes to the government for continuously engaging and making sure that some of these concessions are given. But Peter, you've mentioned very interesting figures. 3 billion, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
In case people are wondering, this is not 3 billion Malawian kwacha. Yeah. Our cousins over there in the East. No. This is 3 billion United States dollars. So one may be asking, it is being deferred to the future generations. And when we talk about the future, this debt is going to be paid by us, the taxpayers, the Zambians. So they are saying, why am I paying for this debt? But where did the money go?
Exactly. And I think that is where we should have gotten it wrong. Because I think initially, the concept of raising loans to finance development is not a bad idea at all. I think all countries in this world, use some form of financing from outside. I think even at a personal level, I'm yet to come across somebody that is entirely debt-free, where they do not get even an advance, they don't get even a simple loan, whether to buy a car, a property.
Even from friends.
Any sort of external financing. I think I would be very interested to meet such a person. Even at national level, at country level, I think it's the same thing. And at country level, it even makes it a bit more challenging, because if you look at the number of people that are living in poverty, the number of people that are not able to contribute positively to the economy because they are incapacitated, I think that number is so huge. So that in itself creates inequalities. So what these inequalities then do is that when it comes to contributing to the tax base, contributing to tax, you are not able to raise as much money as you would raise to be able to meet the expenses that the entire country would always want. So there's always that deficit, meaning that your expenditure for almost every country would always exceed what the country is raising in terms of revenue. So that's what prompts countries to go outside and borrow, because they want to bridge that gap. So for instance, if we say the country would want to invest in a project, and then we say, how much money does the revenue authority collect? So that money, you realize that it's not enough to, first of all, meet the needs of the country in terms of the budget, talk less of even, putting money aside to invest in a particular project. So mostly governments will go out and borrow so that they can bridge that gap. And so now the question is, when they borrow, how they utilize that money is where the problem is. And I think for Zambia, if you look at our utilization of loans, I think we haven't been very efficient. I think the Auditor General's report on external debt brings out all these issues. You realize that the Eurobonds, for instance, I think most of them were used or rather were directed towards infrastructure development. And unfortunately, most of those infrastructure development projects did not really yield, the best results that, would help us even recoup some of the resources or begin to, bring back those resources so we can pay back those monies. So you find that mostly we invested in roads, which is a good thing. But in terms of what roads we invested in, that's another question, because you would then want to look at the return that that road is bringing to the country in the short term and in the long term as well. Are they linking, major industries? Are they linking markets to the industry? So all those are some of the key questions that we need to ask. And then also the utilization itself. So there are some portions of the loans, the Eurobonds specifically, that were supposed to be spent on entities such as the Zambia Railways Authority. But if you look at the Auditor General's report, it does show how this money was mismanaged. I think even today, Zambia Railways, the Zambia Railways
is
still
where it has always been.
It's not something that you can say, wow, we did. It still has its own unique challenges that would still need maybe to be rectified. ZESCO is another example. We've invested so much in ZESCO. I think a good part of the loans, both the guaranteed loans by government and the Eurobonds, also went into rehabilitating and developing some of the power plants that ZESCO has around the country. But as you can see, we are still in in an energy crisis because
load shedding.
Load shedding. So I think those are some of the questions that we need to ask.
We even get surprised when power comes.
Yes,
now.
well, it's here now. You see,
you don't even know what to do with it.
Should I charge my phone? Should I fetch water? Should I? Yeah. So those are some of the things that we may need to look at in terms of utilization. And lastly, I'll speak to the issue of mismanagement of these funds. So the Auditor General's report on external debt also does bring out an incident where some money was withdrawn, I think 100 million or so. Is it 100 million, 100,000, was withdrawn from the Eurobond account, into Control 99. So there's no clear, description of how that money was spent, on what was it invested and all those things. So it's still, but money was actually withdrawn. And then lastly, there are so many other issues around delivery of the procurement items that were purchased using the borrowed money. I think there are a number of things that have been raised: school desks, wrong equipment, equipment that is malfunctional, that was bought using the money that was actually borrowed. So there are a lot of issues that come out when you talk about how we utilize the borrowed money. And partly that is the reason why we even found ourselves in a point of default. Maybe had we borrowed to invest in an industry that would have given us returns quickly, because it was 10 years actually before we started defaulting. So we got the Eurobonds in a period of 10 years. We couldn't even pay back. So meaning that we couldn't raise enough money from the investments that we had made.
When you talk about the issue of defaulting, where do we stand in terms of credibility when it comes to the international financial market? I know President Hakainde Hichilema has been doing an amazing job trying to clean up Zambia's reputation and trying to bring us in the so-called famous Champions League. But where do we stand, realistically speaking? I know there could be other connotations, to determine how the world may view us within the world of finance. And tied to that, you spoke about the issue of fiscal deficit. Now, I'm not against borrowing, but I think you can, in as much as you borrow, or in as much as you go out there to look for money to cushion your deficit, isn't it also important to be looking at areas that you need to be strategically investing in within your domestic economy to build capacity for self-sustenance?
Yes. Yeah, that's very, very true. Maybe let me quickly speak to the issue of international credibility. I think over time, our credibility has improved. Measuring this credibility from our credit ratings, where we are looking at how the international market looks at Zambia in terms of its risk, risk rating, if I should say that. So I think our risk rating was in default status, and some of them had even put us in is it the D or the junk status? The junk status, yes, because we were a defaulting country. And
it was someone made me laugh when they heard the word junk. They called me, they were like, so wakamba bwanje? At once in sema junk in Zambia or bwanje.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, as a country, that's what it basically means. It's a junk status, yeah. But I think those are financial terminologies just to see how, how credible you are. Are you able to pay back if you were given some money? If you borrowed money, would you be able to pay back? Yeah, so I think from the time we defaulted around 2020, 2019, I think we realized as a country as well to say that if we continue servicing our debt, we would be in a very, very huge crisis. And because of the nature of our creditors, diverse pool of creditors, it basically meant that if you are able to pay your creditor A, what belongs to them, you should also be able to pay creditor B what belongs to them. So you cannot give that preferential treatment in terms of which creditor you are servicing loans for. So as a result, we just decided as a country to say, okay, let us remain in default status where we do not service any loans so that we look for a solution to this debt. And then after the solution is found, then we can start paying this debt. Of course, there was an exemption, a preferential exemption, and this was the multilateral debt, IMF, World Bank, and I think Africa Development Bank, because these guys are now saying, if you do not pay us our money, the money that we lent to you, it basically means that we will have no money to give to your neighbors once they fall in an economic crisis. So we needed to maintain that that multilateral relationship with the multilateral bank. So we continued servicing that debt. But the other debt, private debt, bilateral debt, all those kinds of debt, we, I think, stopped and remained in default status. So that had an effect in terms of how the international community looked at us. So they looked at us as defaulters, and we were not a credible nation. And that in itself has a direct effect of affecting investment in terms of how much investment is flowing into Zambia, not only on the public side in terms of the governments, but also on the private side. So if you have a conversation with several commercial banks, you realize that most credit lines that are coming from outside, the international capital markets, who are not coming into Zambia because of the country's, credit rating, if I should say. And also, if it were to come in, it would mean that it would come in at a very high risk premium, meaning that the interest rate on that particular, loan, on that particular credit line will be very high, meaning that it may not attract the necessary investment that it's supposed to attract had your credit rating or had your international credibility been okay. So I think that was those were some of the issues that we obviously had in terms of credibility. But following the progress we've made in debt restructuring, I think so far we've done about 80% or even more than 80% because we have finalized a memorandum of understanding with the official creditors. And I think what was left is now to start signing individual agreements with all the official creditors. And I think France and the government have finalized an agreement. And I think the minister mentioned during the budget speech that model will then be replicated for other bilateral official creditors. So I think that one is as good as done. The Eurobond holders, I think in June, we also finalized an agreement with the Eurobond holder committee. And we also exchanged the bonds because remember the concept of restructuring the Eurobonds. Initially, we had 3 Eurobonds. The concept was to restructure them into 2 new bonds. So I think towards sometime in June, we exchanged the 3 old bonds for the 2 new bonds. Yeah, so we now have bond A and bond B, which are maturing, I think, in 2033 and 2053, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so those are done as well. So what was left is now the non-bonded private debt, this commercial debt from the private creditors, like the international commercial banks, other banks in China, I think. Yeah, but I think recently, should be last month, government did sign an agreement with one of the largest private, non-bonded private creditors, I think from China. So that pushes our restructuring success rate to over 80%. So there's barely less than 20% left in terms of what needs to be restructured. So that in itself has had an effect in terms of how the international community looks at us, because what it means is that once, like for example, the agreement between government and France, once that is done, it means government starts servicing debt already. For the Eurobond debt, government has already started, especially I think bond A, if I'm not mistaken, they've already started servicing. They already paid, I think in June, end of June. They are also, I think, scheduled to pay end of the year. next month, end of next month, they are scheduled to pay another payment towards that particular bond. So that has given the international community some comfort that Zambia is committed towards improving its international reputation and also coming out of debt. So that is itself does also now start attracting investment to Zambia and lowers the risk premium that is attached to these international credit lines.
All right, so we will now take a short break and we'll be back and we'll continue talking about the issue of debt that Zambia is currently dealing with and trying to navigate, even as we aspire to achieve some of those economic objectives, such as Vision 2030, which seeks to see or make the country a prosperous middle-income nation. See you shortly.
We urge all stakeholders to support and actively participate in this campaign.
What are you doing to make sure we get this money back? Because once that money goes to your countries, you treat it as a clean money,
We lack a comprehensive national beneficial ownership register.
So all these, the financial, the illicit flows that are being recorded, what are the young people doing about this?
Welcome back to the People's Space. The name is Wenson Mavor, and I am talking to Mr. Peter Mumba all the way from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, and we are talking debt. And when we talk about debt, obviously, it's the issue of national debt, Zambia's debt. Something that the government is dealing with, something that has dominated economic conversation for the last over 5 years, so to speak, And one of the things that I would like to pick up from before we get into the debt issue, earlier on you said you watched football, but you didn't mention which team you like watching.
Yeah. I think it's obvious, Manchester United.
From the blue suit, I thought it was going to be Chelsea.
No. Manchester United, yeah.
You know what they always say about Man U fans, that they are boasting, they are whatever, so...
But I don't think that's the case with me.
No, I mean, people who do karate don't boast. They're always humble.
They say they're always humble.
You'll see the round Chuck Norris kicks that will come out. But anyway, just to pick up from where we left off, you spoke about government already starting to pay these debts. Now, when government starts disbursing money towards debt repayments, obviously, it has an impact. I would like you to speak to that impact in relation to the crucial role that the IMF plays. IMF obviously comes with austerity. And these austerities obviously affect people. I've had conversations with people, Peter, who will tell you right now, in government, we're not traveling, we're not doing all these things. It's all part of the bigger process to be able to resolve this debt crisis. So in relation to that, how is this debt servicing impacting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think, Watson, that's a very important question and conversation, actually. I think many people have looked at this with a blind eye or rather with a selfish eye. I think going back to the large challenge that Zambia was actually faced with, issues of, unsustainable debt. And this unsustainable debt, maybe in case, people may not really understand, why are we talking about debt? So I always like giving this scenario. I think if you look at the 2023 national, is it 2023? 2022 national budget, I think, you realize that almost 50% of the entire budget, almost 50% of the entire budget was dedicated towards they call that the general the first part of the budget, the general functions, government functions.
Public service function.
Yeah, public service. That first part of the budget. And it's that first part of the budget that has amounts that are related to debt servicing. So if you critically look at that particular function of the budget, you realize that almost 80% of the allocation in that particular function was actually, marked for debt servicing. So that still doesn't steal away from the fact that almost 50% of the entire budget was dedicated towards debt servicing. So what that means is that the remaining 50 is the one now that we are talking about in terms of being able to provide social protection, initiatives or safety nets, being to invest in the economy, talking about building roads, talking about farm blocks, talking about mining, the geological mapping, whatever. All those things were to be done in the remaining 50%. So that in itself puts a country under strain. And I recall what the Minister of Finance had mentioned in one of his appearances on debt restructuring, where he said we got to a point where government could not even sustainably service debt and pay government salaries or public salaries. They had to borrow to actually pay public salaries. You see? So that in itself gives us a picture of what debt was doing to us. And if you recall what he also said during the budget speech this year, he mentioned that had we not restructured our debt, we would have paid, in terms of debt servicing, more than our budget for 2025. That's in 2025. So that already shows us that debt in itself, had we not done anything, would have swallowed our entire budget if we hadn't done anything. So that in itself should be able to give us a picture in terms of where we were and where we would have been. Now, looking at what we have done in terms of restructuring, of course, we now need to start paying back this money, because now we have restructured, we have lengthened the payback period, we have negotiated for lower interest rates. Now we need to start paying back. But again, the important dynamic is that as we are beginning to pay back these monies, what have we done to our revenues? You see, on the revenue front, in terms of what ZRA is collecting. So you agree that over the past 3 years, ZRA has somehow increased their revenue collection efforts. And so it's reflective in terms of how much they are collecting. But they are still not able to collect enough for us to be able to meet, our needs as a country. And so we still need to rely on external sources every now and then. So having said that, we are still saying that even as we are beginning to service our debt, we may still be able to face a challenge, because this money now starts going out versus the money that is coming in. And we don't see that much in terms of revenues and, expenditure. We are still having a deficit that we need to deal with. So that in itself should give us a picture.
Continued pressure on the exchange rate?
Exactly, because remember, this money, first of all, is going out in foreign currency, in US dollar. And so whenever government makes that foreign currency payment, there's always an imbalance on the domestic market, which puts pressure on the kwacha. That's number one. Number two, we are saying that even as government starts servicing this debt, we still haven't collected sufficient resources to be able to give us that cushion to say, even if we pay, we'll still be left in a better off position. And one example I like giving again is what happened this year, where government had to issue a supplementary budget. I think if you unpack the supplementary budget and all those, you realize that yes, there was a core that came because of the drought. Yes, it pushed a lot of money. But another pressure that we had was debt servicing. Remember previously I spoke about the Eurobond debt that required an immediate payment at the end of June, and also required a payment at the point of exchange when the 3 bonds were exchanged for 2. We needed to pay on that particular day as well, the day we exchanged the bonds. So end of the year, we are also paying. So in total, I think the Eurobond debt brings us to about 300 and something million US dollars for this particular year. So where would have the government gotten this money if they hadn't, issued a supplementary budget that responded to the climate crisis as well? So those are some of the, so that gives us a picture to say, even moving forward, even as we start servicing our debt, it still remains an issue that we should carefully be looking at even as time goes. And one thing I'll end with in this particular context is that when you look at what we'll be paying back in the medium term, there's an interesting study report that the Debt Justice has done. I think we did it together. We did provide some comments as the Debt Alliance as well. It still shows that even after restructuring, Zambia will be paying almost 20%, at most 20% of its revenues, so basically saying that almost 20% of Zambia's revenues will be going towards debt servicing. So that's still a high figure because it breaches the threshold that has been put for countries that have a medium debt carrying capacity. Talk less of countries with a low debt carrying capacity like Zambia. So that gives us an indication that we are still going to be feeling the pinch of debt servicing.
Talking about feeling the pinch, Peter, you spoke about the issue of domestic resource mobilization versus our ability to pay. And I would like to add to that equation the issue of a limited tax bracket. In terms of feeling the pinch, Zambians should still expect to feel. It's like this bitter pill is still in our mouth for some time because there's a limited tax bracket that is expected to contribute to ZRA to raise money to pay.
Exactly. And if you look at some of the reforms that have been put in place, the fiscal reforms under the IMF program that Zambia is currently on, the IMF supported program, the IMF always say, this is a Zambian program. We are just supporting it. Yes. So the IMF supported program. I think you realize that there's been several amendments to the, some fiscal policy, some tax reforms rather, and some of these reforms have, tried to harmonize the tax rates, especially the commercial tax rates, company tax. I think previously there was a difference in terms of what the prevailing company tax rate was versus what companies in telecoms were paying. I think coming from COVID-19, telecoms were paying slightly higher, so there was that call to harmonize and make it uniform. I think that's also trying to encourage people to pay tax and not to feel this one pays less, this one pays more, so that they give that push. But beyond that also, there have been other reforms. If you look at the mobile money levy, there's a growing concern that many transactions are being done via mobile money. And so government has imposed a mobile money levy. Of course, the aim would be to be able to tap into that growing resource, but also is to raise more resources so that ultimately we can be able to respond to some of these. Of course, there are many others, but other significant ones have also been, if you look at what government has been doing in terms of combating illicit financial flows, there are so many initiatives that ZRA has come up with, trying to run a more data-driven revenue authority. I was intrigued when the Commissioner General mentioned that what they are working on is a situation where people will not require to submit tax returns and then shock the revenue authority to say, no, this year we have not done any business. He said, by the time you're bringing those returns, we already know how much you should be giving us. We should be telling you to say, Mr. Wenson, your company is giving us this much, not what you have got, what you have put down. So I think that is like another positive to try and reduce how much money is actually flowing out of the country, which is a positive as well.
So moving on, we're out of time, unfortunately, Peter. But of course, there's always next time to continue building on this conversation. But real quickly, an important thing that gained prominence in terms of conversation not so long ago is the issue of debt for nature swap. What is this whole arrangement, and can it help us in any way as a country?
I think rightly put. I think it's something that has gained, some traction. I think in the past few weeks, so this basically is an initiative where it's like an instrument that you swap part of your debt for a particular natural resource, so that the creditors can then be able to benefit from that particular resource that you have put aside. But I must say that most of these initiatives are very complex. And in as much as, yes, it would be timely, especially that Zambia is experiencing a climate crisis, the drought, and may need some kind of innovative financing that can also speak to the climate challenges that we are having. But I think it may need a lot of consultation, because I think if you look at in the region, I think so far in the region only 3 countries have managed to successfully do these debt for nature swaps. And I think Cape Verde is one of them, Gabon and Seychelles. But if you look at even the nature of the debt for nature swap that they did, is a little bit different from the one that Zambia would be.
So which kind of natural resources,
pursuing.
if for argument's sake we were to go this route, what can we offer on the table?
Yeah. So, well, we have a number of natural resources. We have very good, let me say, forest land. We have natural resources such as the Victoria Falls, the water. Yeah. We also have other natural resources. I mean, maybe the mining deposits that we have, the mineral deposits, those could maybe also be part of the natural resources that we may obviously have as well. Yeah. So like I said, I think the debt for nature swap arrangement is quite a complex kind of arrangement. But, if we do our consultations very well and see to it that we also have creditors that are willing to jump on this particular initiative, I think it would then be a good one to explore. But added to that, I think also there's another facility that government is trying to benefit from under the IMF, the Resilience Sustainability Trust Fund, where the minister mentioned that they may be looking forward to getting some money to be able to respond to some of the challenges we're having as well on the climate side. Talk about building more dams and other climate-related projects. So there will be need to look at that as well.
In a minute, Peter, in a minute. As we conclude, obviously we would love to know, what the outlook of Zambia's debt sustainability is like, considering the progress that we've made so far within the restructuring process.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the outlook...
This one has to be brief.
Okay.
Otherwise,
all right.
The director will fire you
will fire me. All right. So I think in terms of the outlook, the outlook is somehow positive. Although I think it will still need a lot of political will. I think even beyond the UPND administration, should we have another administration coming after the UPND, we still need to see that consistency in political will to be prudent in public finance management. I think that will help us quite, and also to be prudent in public debt. If you see now, government is only accumulating concessional loans, meaning that these are cheaper kind of loans that you may not quite be able to default unless otherwise, compared to the other commercial loans that we got. So I think going forward, there will be need for political will to prudently manage our public debt. But otherwise, like I had said, the amount of revenue that we'll be paying towards debt servicing, even after restructuring, still remains significant. So that in itself also means we need to continue working hard to attract investment and grow our economy so that we can ultimately be able to have capacity to pay back. Otherwise, we may need to restructure again when these restructured loans fall due in the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is just part one. And Peter, thank you very much for coming through. Definitely we need a part two to come and talk about debt. But to sum up our conversation, things are looking up where debt management is concerned, as government is making frantic efforts to get us out of the doldrums. And of course, the side effects is some of these economic shocks that we are experiencing. But again, Peter has labored to explain some of the opportunities that government is exploring to be able to mitigate the impact of debt management and the restructuring process that we have embarked on. From me, Wenson Mavoro, and my guest, of course, who is a cocktail of talents. He's a karateka, he's a black belt. He can act, he can produce, he can direct. He can even do what I'm doing right now. So thank you very much, Peter, for coming through once again. And we look forward for that part two for our conversation. But this has been The People's Space, and we appreciate your support, and we always premiere and broadcast our shows on a Thursday. So make sure you tune in to our YouTube page or stay locked to the Center for Trade Policy and Development Facebook page, where these particular episodes are shared. And let's get interactive in our comment section and let us know what you think and some of the questions or topics that you would like us to address on this particular platform. Remember, it is The People's Space after all, so we are very much keen to hear from you. See you next time, and bye.